Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our January 27th, 2025 Special Council meeting. I will now call the meeting to order. May I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favour? That carries unanimously. And I will turn it over to Councillor Sadhu for the territorial acknowledgement.
We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Thank you very much, Councillor. There are no additions to the agenda. May I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda as presented? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. All those in favour? That carries unanimously. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest, councillors? Councillor Martin?
Through you or to you, Mayor Solomon, I just wanted to clarify that at our last meeting, I was unclear about two items that were sort of connected to NITHU, but not. I did clarify with the Integrity Commissioner, and there is not a conflict of interest or pecuniary interest. So I just wanted to clarify that I will be voting on those two items as they come up.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cressman?
Yes, I did the same as it relates to the capital item setting funds aside in lieu of the DCs, and I was informed it is not a pecuniary, and it likely originally wasn't even, was at the most a conflict of interest as perceived by others, but now that my aunt has passed, it doesn't remain a conflict of interest.
Okay, thank you for the clarification, councillors. Seeing no other comments, we will move along to the minutes of the previous meeting, and the recommendation is that the minutes from January 16th Special Council meeting be adopted as presented. May I have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favour? That carries unanimously. We're going to start the discussion by pulling up items number 9, which are councillor motions, because it will potentially, depending on how we proceed, impact the rest of the meeting. So we are going to start with item 9.1, and that is Councillor Dunstall's notice of motion regarding the assessment of buildings and land. Sorry, Councillor Sadhu, you had a question?
Yeah, just for clarification, it's 8.1.
Apologies, we have different numbers on my printed copy versus what's online. Thank you for clarifying. So 8.1, and yes, councillor notice of motions. Councillor Dunstall, I will invite you if you'd like to introduce your first notice of motion there.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. We had discussed this at our last meeting, and it was brought forward here. This is part of a long-term strategy. I'm not going to read the motion, however, I will summarize it. We're asking community services to do a complete dive, a complete cost analysis on all of our buildings. We have $534 million in assets, and I think that part of our long-term strategy should see cost-benefit analysis, space usage, surplus assets, community input, tenant opportunities. There's a lot for us to see there. So I think it's worth the time to do and see if there's anything that isn't working that we can sell and put some money in our coffers.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Is there a seconder to get this motion on the floor? Seconded by Councillor Martin. I will now open it up to discussion if anybody has comments or questions. Councillor Cressman.
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Dunstall, looking at these, it also includes looking at additional revenue streams at these buildings as well, does it not?
Yes, it does. There was some mention when I was speaking to someone about perhaps using one of them as a daycare. So we're certainly going to look at perhaps having them used by a third party so that we can generate some revenue.
Follow-up for Councillor Cressman.
Yes, as a follow-up as well, I'm wondering, is there opportunities as well look at co-locating libraries or whatever at some of these facilities to eliminate some of the buildings we have. Is that
I think that's a great idea. I think we should look at every single possibility, whether we're bringing in someone to generate revenue, whether we can take two community centers and put them together, or libraries, whatever we need to do to try to ease the burden on our taxpayers.
Any other questions or comments right now, councillors? Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I think in general the exercise is a good one, and probably a lot of this may be based on the recent community services master plan that was just done. I think the only point of concern for me is potentially when we start looking at surplus facilities and how we deem that, mainly from a perspective of if you have a community facility that's used and it's the only meeting place for a small close-knit community, that would be a concern if we deem it to be surplus. My other concern would be, then we start looking at, do we sell an asset that really someone's going to buy for pennies on the dollar? Are we really potentially putting ourselves at risk? So I want to make sure that we take into context everything when the report is done, and make sure that we really think through some of those other social impacts as well. I mean, definitely in favor of looking for savings, and maybe there is opportunities for co-location or other business uses in terms of bringing in tenants and whatnot. But that would be my only just general comment and point of concern would be is that do we risk selling something for too little and then potentially hurting the community down the road?
Councillor Dunstall?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I understand what you're saying, Councillor, and we are asking for a report to come back, and that report then will identify surplus. We are also asking for the community to be engaged, especially if one of the buildings is a building that's being considered as a surplus. So once we get that report, then I guess we can dive into and see how we do that. And I'm very well aware that there are small communities within Wilmot, and they only have that community center, and that's their meeting place. So we have to balance their need and the need of the township.
I was just curious what timeline you were hoping for this.
I was hoping for April.
For April return? Okay. And staff, I'm just curious on the realities of that, as this is quite comprehensive addition to your work plan. I don't know if Director Catania, you want to comment?
Through you, Mayor Salmon, to Councillor Dunstall, it is going to be comprehensive. I might be aggressive to try to get to April at this point.
That's not a problem. That is not a problem. I want this done right. It involves a lot of people who go to these places, so would June or July work? Why don't you tell me what's going to work, what you can do? I want to make sure this is done properly, and I want to make sure that we really dig in and get all of the numbers, all the factual numbers, so that we can make these serious decisions.
Through you, Mayor Salmon, to Councillor Dunstall, yes, through the Community Services Master Plan, this is an exercise that I do welcome. It is a recommendation, or a few different recommendations coming from that. So the big piece is the consultation with our groups, which we have, we're looking at our affiliation policy as well. The one concern that I will bring up is when it comes to the fair market valuation, third-party real estate market analysis, generally speaking, just from some preliminary work I've already done, if there's a commercial real estate firm that's out there that thinks that they're going to get that work, they could provide some type of pretty much free initial costing. But if there's analysis that's going to be done, there would be a fee. I don't know, it's up to council at this point. I don't mind coming back to council with a quick report just to let you know if there's any costings associated with that type of exercise. The internal piece, a lot of the internal just with the usage and consulting with our community groups, we can definitely, that's an in-house exercise we're going to be doing anyways, but it's more that expertise on the outside for that market evaluation. I just want to make sure council's aware, because there could be a cost that would come with that, depending on the scope.
Through you, Mayor. Then I would ask that you start the internal work, and then as that progresses, perhaps you could get some pricing and then come back to the township, and then we can make that decision then.
Perfect.
Councillor Cressman?
Yes, I guess the piece that I look at this through you, Mayor, and this is to Director Catania as well, is looking at evaluating whether it's surplus or not from, I think beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. And so if you're in the small communities, as my fellow councillor indicated, it's essential. And often cases they help fundraise and put the capital in place to build it. Sure. I know this is what I hear in my community of New Dundee, and it's the corner of the township. Doesn't have the ability to draw people south of it because we're right against Blanford, Blenheim. And so I guess the question is, that's the tricky part as we go forward is, how do we determine what is surplus or not? I'm not against the motion, not speaking against it, but I think that will be the piece that will be contentious or tricky as we go forward.
Through you, Mayor, I will remove the word surplus, which seems to be causing a lot of concern. I do think that it gives a connotation that I did not intend. I want the information to come back that gives us the usage. How many people use it? Is it used 365 days a year, 3 months a year? I want that information. And then from that information, we will decide if it's something. And again, the public would engage quite extensively. So that's perhaps surplus gives a connotation that was not meant. It's just to get the report so that we can see the numbers black and white and then make a decision based on usage, cost, how much does it cost us, how much does it bring in, that kind of stuff.
Councillor, before you formally remove it, if I could just suggest, and especially because municipalities, including Wilmot in, I believe it was the 90s, kind of went through and sold surplus lands. I doubt we're going to really find surplus per se. I think leaving the word is fine because it'll get the interpretation that you're looking for. But what I would perhaps suggest after hearing from staff is maybe that the fair market valuation or third-party real estate market analysis be done at a later stage if we find that there are properties we're interested in further investigating.
I would agree to that.
I don't know if that's something that council wishes. I'm just trying to find a way for us to proceed forward.
Yep. I would take that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, so we're not doing friendly amendments.
Okay.
Looking at our clerk, but if you would like to make that amendment and somebody else second it, we can vote on that as an amendment.
I would make that amendment. We might as well not go down that road on every property. We might as well narrow it, the scope and of the inquiry.
Okay, and is there a seconder for that then? Seconded by Councillor Sadhu. So on that amendment, all those in favor? That carries unanimously. So now we have the motion as amended. Any other questions or comments on the motion as it stands? I'm seeing Director Catania, you have a comment.
Through you, Mayor Sallin and Councillor Dunstall, just a clarification on the scope, and I just want to make sure that we're crystal clear with facilities and property, and just maybe spelling out from a council perspective which ones you're looking at, because there are multiple properties. There are obviously the township has libraries that we own the Capitol building from. So I'm not sure if this is the WRC or it's just satellite buildings. So up to council on your direction you want to give staff.
Well, we have 5 community centers, right, in a township of 22,000 people. So I guess I would start there, if that's what you're asking me. Sorry, I also liked the idea of merging perhaps some of the libraries. So I'm not sure if you can look into that as well. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody have any other comments or questions then on the motion as it stands? As it stands amended, and with that final direction, it will be looking at our recreation centers and our libraries to look at essentially utilization and report back on potential options going forward. Okay, seeing that we all have that understanding, I will call the vote. All those in favor, that carries unanimously. We will now go on to 8.2, and this is Councillor Dunstall's motion regarding long-term funding strategy, and I will turn it back over to Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Obviously, 36% is too much for our taxpayers to bear. But we do need infrastructure. We've kicked it down the road now. We're 19 million behind, and we've got another 1.4, I think, in infrastructure, of which 95% of that's going to come back next year. So I thought that putting this on the table so we could start the discussion. I actually sent, Candace, if you can get that up for me, please, the long term. I actually sent out a newsletter with the update from the last meeting. 895 people have viewed that newsletter, which is the highest I've ever received. And one of the biggest questions that they were asking was what the impact was going to be. Candace, do you have that? It's the long-term strategy, Candace. I wanted to show, I put this chart in my, actually, here we go. I spoke with CAO, I know it's small, isn't it? I spoke with CAO, and if you can put that on the screen on YouTube so that people at home can see it. And when I spoke to CFO Clark, he mentioned that most people were between the 4,000 and 6,000 mark. That if we took an average, most were around the 5,000 mark. So at the 4,000 mark, it's $8.70 a month. And at the 6,000 mark, it's just a little over $13 a month. And I think that breaks it down to a figure that most people, or I'm hoping that everyone can handle, and it gets us to where we need to go. It ensures the township reaches sustainable financial position, aligned with our comparable municipalities, gradually addresses capital needs without overwhelming the taxpayers. That's the motion.
Councillor, if I can just get clarity on what you were referring to the costing breakdown, because I can't see it very well from here. You were referring the capital proposal, if it's at your proposed 9%, that the capital portion of the increase of your tax bill would be the roughly $8 per month?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So this is strictly for the capital piece, the 9%. This has nothing to do with the operational piece.
Yep, just wanted to confirm I was understanding correctly. Thank you.
Okay.
So councillors, I do want to note that we have a very similar other motion for this evening. I just kind of want to share where that kind of leads us in decision making. So if you are interested in both this motion and the other one, what I would suggest now is really what we discuss is the percentage amount proposed and the number of years that it's proposed over. Should this motion successfully be passed at whatever percentage is discussed and decided in what year time frame, then that would inform for the next motion that's coming up of the similar nature. I think it's in two motions. It would inform what numbers are filled in because they were left blank on the percentages. And then that motion could be debated and potentially go forward. Really in looking at the two, I think in spirit and nature, they're both looking at a similar proposal to achieve a multi-year strategy. I think, and in speaking with staff, that it wouldn't be contradictory to have both of them pass so long as it's the same percentage number essentially at the end of the day that we're agreeing upon. Of course, also you have open to you the option, if you don't like the motions on the floor, to defeat them. But I thought I would just give that logistical interlude if you're wondering about the following motion later on that is also quite similar in nature. And just trying to perhaps guide this conversation to discussing the amount of the 9% increase that Councillor Dunstall's put on the floor and the 4 years to kind of leave for opening. But I will open up the conversation with that. Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, and including you, I guess, if we were thinking that it's possible to pass both motions and that they wouldn't be contradictory, I'm just wondering, is it possible to discuss two motions at the same time, or is that against procedure? The reason you're saying no, we can't do that? Yeah. Because I mean, I agree with your comments, Mayor Salonen, that it looks like they're not contradictory, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page and that one does not absolve the other. And so if we approve one and then get to the next one and then try to approve it, and then there's something, like I just want, so what I'm interested in is a discussion. Is that a possibility? Is it possible to have a discussion about the spirit of both motions so that we make sure that we're all on the same page and we don't see them as contradictory?
Yeah, I do still need to get the seconder. Don't worry, haven't forgotten about that, Councillor Cressman. To answer your question, Councillor Martin, I think I'm just going to make a ruling as the chair based off of procedure that we're going to deal with each motion independently, just so we're not potentially getting into a gray area. As I mentioned, I did have meetings earlier today with staff, and we did discuss essentially every possible outcome. And should the outcome be that we choose to only pass one of them, then that motion would stand as is. Should we choose to pass both of them, like I said, we would be taking the percentage informed by the discussion from here and putting into the next one so that they aren't contradictory and staff don't see from a direction level them being contradictory. And should we choose to defeat them both, then it's a moot point. And yeah, so I think that that's how I'm going to decide as chair that we proceed, just to make sure that we are following procedure. I know it's a bit odd that we have two motions very much of the same spirit. And also when we get to the next motion, if there is a particular wording or lining that you have flagged and seen that perhaps staff or I have not, that you think might be contradictory, of course, that would be the opportunity to bring it up when we're discussing the next one. But right now we'll deal with and dispense of this item once I get a seconder for it, seconded by Councillor Cressman. So again, I would kind of propose that we look at discussion being around the percentage and the years. And before we do that, I know that Acting CAO Clark does have some numbers on what this would mean if it were to be passed at the 9%.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and to Council. If the 9% went in as the capital amount, so right now the capital amount is about 36%, so that would come out and this 9% would go in. The current budget as it stands would be 19.29% without considering any of the other further items still to be discussed. So we would be at 19.29% increase.
Thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Cressman.
Through you, Mayor, to Acting CEO Clark. If this motion passes, what level of control do we have on future council actions? Is this a suggested amount to, there would be 2 years out, there would be an elected council? Could we amend this next year? I'm just trying to gain what we're bound, or is it a perception, or is there reality to this?
I mean, I can answer that one because it's procedural. This would be passed in essence, but still even next year at our budget, we as council have the full power to decide if we continue the strategy, and that would be true of any councils going forward. But it would be giving direction to staff on how they would set up the next budget. But yes.
Yeah, to add to what the mayor's saying, and procedurally, I'm not going to, she's got that 100% right, but the big piece for us is the direction. That's what we need, is a direction on a strategy, on a way forward, so that each year we're not sort of guessing. But you're right, a council can change its mind each year. We cannot hold future council to an improved budget or a recommendation for a future budget.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Stu.
Yeah, just a comment and a thought. I like kind of where this is headed. I look at the term that we're going to hope to amortize it over. I know with this motion that's being proposed over 4 years. The second motion is between 5 and 7. With my day job, I've always advised people, if you want to keep the payment low, amortize it a little bit longer, with the ability that if the financial times are good, you can always add more. So I would be somewhat leaning towards a 5 to 7 year window. Essentially, it's taken us almost 20 years to get into this. 5 to 7 would be roughly half the time to get out of it. Obviously, it's going to be a lot better than 1 year or 2 years, but I'm just thinking out loud here like my fellow councillor Martin would do, so I'm just kind of throwing that out in the atmosphere that although this is a good start, if we possibly amortize it over a little bit longer to bring the percentage increase down a little bit so it's a little more attainable too.
Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. The only issue that I have with that is that we've got a lot of work that needs to be done. So that 9% given this year, as it is now, with the small amount of reserves that you have, and the 9%, if this was to go through, you would still have to prioritize quite a few of the capital projects, especially, and my concern is infrastructure. My concern is Director Mullen, whose area, roads, pipes, water, all that kind of stuff. So the 9% will be used towards that stuff. So if we reduce it, we have less money. Yep. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor, I want to make sure there was a question there.
Was that a question? I thought that was a comment.
I guess my question is that if we go lower and spread it out longer, we're just going to delay more of these jobs that need to get done, correct?
Yes, that's true, councillor, in that we have a backlog and we have a number of expenses that need to be paid, and by deferring it out longer, it's going to take us much, much longer to get to that work, and we're putting off critical infrastructure.
Okay, all right. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking we're looking at about $10 a month, roughly. You had mentioned to me, C.O. Clark, that most people were in the 5,000 range. That was probably about average. So taking between the $8 and something and the 13, I'm looking at about 10 or 11 a month. So I would still stick with the 9%.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, looking at this, I agree with the concept and where we're headed. I guess a couple of questions pop up is that based on the work we did thus far in terms of deferring capital items, what is the funding requirement needed in order to meet what still remains on the table today? So that's sort of question number one. And then I guess question number two is, and I certainly don't need it today, or it'd be nice to get it, but when you suggested there's a $19 million backlog in infrastructure, do we have the details on that sort of inform where that number's coming from? So again, the idea in principle as stands, like, yes, phase in the increase. I think that's absolutely what we need to do. And that's, again, I'm speaking to this motion, so the hope would be that we can come up with a plan that obviously steadily increases the funding to our capital program. But the question is what do we need today based on what we've trimmed and what's presented and still on the floor? So what further cuts would need to be made, I guess, is the additional piece to that question. And then again, where do we sort of account for the backlog and how are we coming up with that number?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor. So rough estimate based on the decisions that were made, and this is considering that fire, there wasn't a decision made, it was a request for additional information. We still need about 27% out of that 36% for capital. So we didn't move a lot off, and really the only thing we moved that's not going to come back next year is New Hamburg Arena. Everything else is just pushed down the road and then goes up by the cost of construction. In terms of the backlog, that's directly from our asset management plan that was updated. It's on the website. I can provide a link to council. That's basically identifying any infrastructure that's in a poor or very, there's two bottom categories. I think it's poor and very poor. They're basically beyond the useful life and considered, potential for failure. But that's identified in our asset management plan.
Councillor Wilkinson for follow-up.
Through the chair, can you just provide that number one more time? The total amount is 27 million or 27%?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor. So we were asking for a 36% increase for capital.
Yes.
We would still need 27% increase for capital to deal with what was left after last week's.
So through the chair, as a follow-up then, 9% obviously doesn't get us anywhere close to what's the plan moving forward if it's 9%?
So that's sort of skipping ahead to the later on in the discussion. We would have, based based on the funding that council decides on tonight, then we would come back February 24th with a package of capital projects that we would present that would fit within that funding envelope. And so we would have to prioritize additionally beyond what council's already prioritized and provide some commentary about risk and cost and potential other funding, whether it's grants or things to maybe move projects ahead. But yes, we would have to prioritize a significant amount of that work out to future years.
Any other questions or comments at this moment? Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair. Okay, so 9 million still leaves us, or sorry, 9%, excuse me, leaves us still really short of where we need to be. Based on your calculations and looking at the asset management plan and the needs there, as well as future capital requests, do we have some sort of forecast that, again, goes really out into the future to suggest or inform us as to what we may need year over year moving forward? Because, again, I get it, you're coming this year saying you need 36%. However, 9% phased in over 4 years still will leave us significantly short of where we need to be. Is that accurate?
So through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that is accurate. The asset management plan calls for $10 to $12 million a year in capital funding from tax sources, and we're currently if this increase would be approved, we'd be at about $7 million. So this just gets us over that about 60% threshold. So there's going to be additional asks for additional capital. Part of the work that needs to be done, and this is my first budget, my first rodeo with everybody here, is to go through that and look at how do we align those things. So I really can't say next year, that's why the 4 years, 9% gives us direction. It doesn't solve our problems today. It doesn't solve our problems in 4 years, but it gives us direction. So then we can begin to work, and then we bring back to council over the summer an update that says, okay, if we go with 9% a year for the next 3 years, here's what we have to push out, here's what has to be deferred, and then years 5 through 25, we need an additional X% a year to get us to a sustainable point. And we're not unique. Every municipality is dealing with this. Every municipality is struggling to get to that sustainable level. And sustainable doesn't mean 100% of funding. So I want to make that 100% clear too. So just because the asset management plan says 10 to 12 million a year doesn't mean that's where we have to land up, but we have to get closer to that. We have to get better information. We have to make different decisions, whether it's facility life, road construction, parks, rec, all of those things play into it. And that's why we need some direction to get started, and then we continue to iterate with that, with this council and future councils on getting closer and closer to a sustainable level over a period of a couple of decades.
Councillor Cressman?
Yes, yes. Through you, Mayor, to Acting CAO Clark. I'm looking at, I think the wild card to a certain extent is what growth is going to happen in the township, and you hate to hang all your hopes on something that might not occur in the time frame that you were hoping it to occur, especially in an acknowledged time when there's a slow up in construction, a depression or whatever, recession or whatever we want to call it. So I guess the question is, how much can we count on future growth? We've approved some subdivisions. We're looking at some projects. We're taking on some projects that are growth related, but the unknown is how quickly those subdivisions are going to be developed. So what's best management when it comes to those type of unknowns?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor, one of the key things to remember about growth is that growth does not pay the full cost of growth. So typically capital infrastructure is not 100% covered from growth, and we see that with DC exemptions and other costs. And the other thing we have to remember when we're looking at growth is as we build new infrastructure for that growth, so whether it's expanded roads, expanded services, water, wastewater, those now form part of our infrastructure that needs to be replaced. So typically growth, that comes from new assessment is looked at as a revenue to fund the services that go with that growth and not a solution to our existing infrastructure shortfall. Typically, it doesn't mean that in the short term it doesn't provide an influx of cash, but over a long period of time, they eventually will get into an infrastructure backlog if we don't put away their money for their future needs. So there's a timing issue where they can be helpful, but long term it's not good practice.
Just as a follow-up through you, Mayor, but we're caught in the middle ground where we invest in infrastructure for growth, and if the growth doesn't occur, we're holding on to the proverbial bag without anything in it.
Yes, I will take that comment and say you're probably not wrong. Any other questions or comments or amendments at this time, councillors? Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, I guess I'm curious about using a number like 9% and then the following motion, which I know we're not discussing two at the same time. We're putting a percentage on when we haven't gone through all of the items, or I'm just wondering, is it better to try to prioritize some of the capital items first before finalizing a certain percentage? I guess I'm just wondering which is better procedural wise. So I'm not sure if it's my colleagues, or I'm happy to hear from Acting CAO Clark.
Well, I will actually comment on it because we already did that at our last budget meeting. We went through every capital request and decided if we wanted more information to remove it from this year's capital plan or not. I would say we've already kind of tackled that and clearly have come up to realizing that it's not quite there. I would also say that staff have more insight in some scenarios on what might need to be prioritized based off of extremely poor conditions. So I think it's a partnership that we're really looking for. We did some of the heavy lifting at our last meeting by giving a sense of direction where we wanted to go. Now looking at giving them a percentage to then come back, which again will be their recommendations, which council ultimately has the final decisions on, is kind of where I think that we're standing, unless council has a different interpretation. But that just my understanding of, we have already gone through every capital budget item at our last meeting. Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, if I can pick up and maybe clarify where Councillor Martin's going, because I appreciate your comments, but there are items still obviously on the table that we've got more information back on that may change, right? And I'll draw attention to, for example, the fire budget. There's some significant pieces in there that may dramatically alter what the funding needs are. I mean, not to go off topic too much.
Just discussing with the clerk procedurally what that would look like. Okay, so that's perfectly fine if we want to discuss the capital items that are coming up later. Just procedurally, which I was getting clarification on, it would require a motion to defer because we currently have this motion on the floor. So it'd be a motion to defer, then I as the chair can call up the capital items for us to discuss if we want. And then we can come back to, we can defer it to after discussing tonight's capital items that we got additional information on. Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, and stop me if I'm waiting outside of where we should be here, but I think thinking it through, I would be in favor of deferral until we finish discussing the other business that we'd started. And as maybe a gesture of goodwill, I know I have a motion coming as well. I don't want to go too far off topic, but I would consider obviously deferring that as well in spirit here of making sure that we bring those back maybe towards the end or until we accomplish the other business discussion first.
Yeah, so as chair, what I was saying is we can defer this until, bring it back after, essentially the deferral, if somebody wanted to bring it forward, would be to discuss after we go through tonight's capital items that we received more information. So we would skip over everything, and I can do that as chair, go to the capital items on the agenda, which I think are item 7, and then we can discuss through all of those and then bring this back should that be the will of council. I do still think, regardless of where we wind up on that discussion, I don't think that's necessarily going to get us down from 27% down to 9%. So we may still be left in a similar scenario that the percentage council is thinking about would still require staff input on where to further prioritize. I don't know that definitively. I'm just kind of thinking out loud as we go forward. Councillor Dunstall?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. The 36.87, I think it was, that encompasses everything, correct? That gets us to the 60%, and it takes care of what we're looking for now.
Yes, the 36.8% funds the budget items that were identified today, yes.
And that gets us to about 60%, you were saying, of where we need to be, correct? So even if we take things off, so if we were to reduce it by another 3 million, and if it's coming from infrastructure, we've already gone through this, but let's say that we kick it down the road, we're still in a deficit. So 9%, whether we're looking at 36.87 or 22.5, whatever it is, we're still in a pretty big deficit, correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that is correct.
I say correct all the time. I have to work on that. I don't like it. I sound like a teacher. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I like where Councillor Dunstall is going here. I think maybe what I'm getting at, or at least my perception, is that obviously even the reductions that we had already discussed only got that funding requirement down to 27%. So there's still a sizable gap there. Mm-hmm. So I guess the thing that I'm getting at is it more prudent for us to go through the information, continue to have the discussion, and then have a better idea of where that funding gap exists, which could inform that 9% either going up, or if we were comfortable maybe looking at moving it down. I don't know, either way. I think it's just more information might lead to a more informed discussion around this number. But I agree with where this is sort of headed in terms of direction.
So in terms of moving things forward, is anybody looking to defer this until we go through the other capital items? Councillor Dunstall?
Again, and someone needs to explain this to me, because apparently I'm not getting it. That 9% only gets us to 60%. That 9% doesn't even come close to covering what we need to cover for this year.
If I'm understanding correctly, Councillor, it's to see what decisions we make on the items that are returning back, because there may potentially be appetite to actually increase that from 9% if there is small gapping, not to 27, I don't think, but if I'm reading the room correctly, there may be appetite to go up a few percentile if it gets us closer based off of decisions. For example, if we make on fire tonight, that may reduce
I got you.
the funding for this year. That is the understanding, if I'm reading the room correctly, as to why I think some people want to understand and make those decisions before we decide on the final percentage.
I understand.
Not that I'm suggesting that that's where the conversation is going to wind up, just my interpretation of what's happening. Councillor Martin and then Councillor Cressman.
So thank you, Mayor Sallin, through you. This is really the spirit of where I was going when I asked the question. I understand. I was also here, and I understand we went through all those items. So I'm not trying to dispute that. But I think that we're struggling with a number of areas and trying to figure out how to prioritize. I do wonder, could we ask Acting CEO Clark to respond? I think he was going to make some comments earlier. Would that be okay, or?
I don't have an issue with that. I'm just not certain to remember what the comments were.
I mean, through you, Madam Mayor, I guess the I agree council needs to make decisions and give direction on the capital items. The struggle is the picture you're looking at is very, very large right now, and we're peeling away at the outside of that picture and trying to pull little things off. And what, from a direction perspective, and this is where the 9% or whatever number it is, it would allow staff to do some of that background work for you and bring you back a recommendation that says, okay, to fit into 9%, we've got to move this, this, and this. And we work to make that budget fit. Is it ideal? In an ideal world, we would put forward the group of projects, the funding increase would come along, and but that's not the world we're living in right now, where that number is 36%. And so that's where trying to find that middle ground where we can move forward on a direction, and staff can do some of that legwork to bring back to council to show you what we would propose moving and prioritizing, because as we go through each project, it's not as straightforward as this project takes $10 out and that project takes $100 out. Moving them into next year, moving them down, it has a ripple effect, so it's not as simple as simply taking dollars off that budget line and saying, okay, now we're down, $1 million. That's 2% or 10%. So that was my only caution, is that there's value in council going back through those capital items. I just don't think that those are going to be the solution to go from 27 down to 9%. If council's consideration is, is it a number higher than 9%? That I can see there being value in. I just don't know how many iterations we want to go through with this. That's my concern, is if you pick off 6 projects and then we go, okay, you're now down to 27 or 24%, and then we come back and pick 3 more projects, like that could be a very time consuming process. So just trying to find an efficient way to get us to move forward is really where I was thinking my thought process when you were having that discussion.
I believe Councillor Cressman was next. Yeah. You're good? Okay. Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, I agree with what interim CAO Clark is suggesting here in terms of process. Perhaps if I can make a recommendation, I might get a motion here. But what I'm hearing is that yes, there's value maybe discussing the items tonight, but the back and forth, that could prolong things for months, and I don't disagree. So this is going to be maybe a convoluted motion, but I would move to. No, it's okay, Kaylin. Move to defer this motion and conversation till after we discuss the capital requests that are on the agenda for this evening, and then revisit it with the understanding that in spirit, if we achieve a number later on, we're not looking to come back and go through all the projects again individually. I think at that point we can refer back to staff and say, this is your funding envelope, figure it out.
Okay, so that's been moved by Councillor Wilkinson. Is that a question?
That is a question. Okay,
I would look for a seconder first, and then we can go to your question. Seconded by Councillor Stu, now Councillor Dunstall.
So my motion's still on the floor, though, correct? Or no?
So it's, right now what's on the floor is your motion being deferred to discuss in about 12 items.
Correct. So my question to you is, will there be a decision made this evening?
Yes.
For that number, whether
Yes.
it's 9%, 10%, 8%, whatever that is going to be?
Well, there will be a decision made on your motion. It will depend to council as to, I'm assuming it's a percentage we're going on, but yes, tonight we will still be dealing with your motion. It's now we're just changing the order and passing all the other motions and going to items 7. Yes, but I'm just saying, should the deferral go through, it would be to now go through item 7. Most of them are simply for information. There are a few decision items to make decisions on. Then we will go back to your motion and then proceed with the remaining councillor motions.
I have no issue with that. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have a mover and a seconder on the floor for deferring this motion to after discussing all of items under 7, which is reports on the agenda. Any other comments or questions? It would be on time or place of this, which we've already established will be still in tonight's meeting. Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? And that carries unanimously. So we will now, if you're following along, jump ahead to reports, which is items number 7. Starting with the operating budget components, because I'm just going to dispense it all now since I attempted to make this a smoother process, and I think I just further complicated it. So we will go through all of the reports, starting with 7.1.1. This was the department-specific variance report. There isn't actually a decision-making point on this unless councillors want to bring forward anything from the additional information that staff provided, including questions. If anyone has any, now would be the time. Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I think based on the variance report, I think it accomplishes maybe the spirit of what I was looking for. I was maybe hoping personally for a touch more detail, but sort of going through the departmental requests, I came up with a number, I can't remember the exact, but it's about, we'll say around 170, maybe 190,000 in terms of an increase there. It's very close to being inflationary, I would assume, so that's where those costs are coming from. So sort of taking that into account, maybe if someone wants to do the quick math and just report back on that and what the equivalent percentage tax increase would be there just in terms of overall budgetary increases, that's helpful because it does break down quite well as sort of where the overall spending is going. I don't know if that's direction or just friendly or...
Just to clarify, when were you hoping to get that information? Reported tonight? Oh, okay. Can you just... Okay.
Through the chair, I'll just take the report as is. It was informative, but again, I was maybe hoping for more depth.
Okay. Councillor Cressman?
Yes, through you, Mayor, to Director Mullenhouse, looking at water and wastewater increase of 241, 320, is that being covered by increase in rates or rather than the entire ratepayers of the township?
Through you, Mayor, so those numbers are related to the regional increase in supply and treatment. We do also have obviously an increase with our rates, and that's part of our, the system of water and wastewater, the financial environment where we do have to, we are obligated to maintain a no loss type of environment. So we do increase our rates, but yes, that number that's purported there is the regional rate volumetric increase.
Just one follow-up. So that's all going to be covered by changes in rates to the services that are provided. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on the variance report, Councillor Dunstall?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Actually, I did want to ask you, Director Mullenhouse, that's $250,000, which seems pretty high to me, and I know you and I had this discussion because it kind of ticks me off. We pay the 56% plus. We have this. Is that $250,000, does that seem logical to you from what the pricing that you're seeing from our end? You're not going to tell me, are you? Because, yeah, okay. All right. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, I'll just address that. I would expect rate increases. It's obviously very standard in terms of a water and wastewater operating environment. Typically, they cover operation and maintenance as well as capital. And so when we do have capital increase in terms of cost, then you should expect that rates will also go up accordingly to maintain that sort of zero loss environment, if you will.
Good answer.
Councillor Cressman?
So I'm going to poke at this a little bit farther because there would be reserves that are set aside from that too. And so given the increase for the cost, do we include an escalator on the portion that we put for reserves as well?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor. So yes, within our budget. So this is the cost that we send off to the region, and it's based on their rate increases of 5.9 and 6.9% respectively, then within our budget, we look to increase our costs plus our reserve contributions and reflect that in our increased rate. And our increased rate, because our model is fairly simplistic at this point, we use the region's rate as a proxy and worked our budget within that, and so that's why you see our rate increases mirroring theirs for this year, because it reflected our experience as well.
Any other questions or comments at this time? Councillor Crest?
I hate to flog this horse anymore, and maybe that's the wrong picture, but just given the estimated life of our buried infrastructure when it comes to water distribution and sewage collection, is that how our models are built, or do we have lifetime analysis that is appropriate, or do we use guides from others to inform us on that? I guess I look at the capital items that we've actually included and went over, and there's a significant number, and you know, we looked at life expectancy of underground infrastructure that was put in the late 60s, early 70s, and is that the normal life expectancy? Is it different? Do we look at our models? I don't know. They're not different than life insurance models, but I kind of look at this and say, do we have to alter our models to have adequate reserves to cover into the future? I guess eventually got wrong.
Through you, Mayor. So a couple things there. First, I think as far as our understanding of condition and life for our assets, we're probably in the younger stage, I would say, in terms of collecting information and understanding where our assets are distributed across their life and where they might be coming to their end of useful life, or where they might be due for some rehabilitation. So we are collecting a lot of information and gaining more in the last 5 to 10 years that is helpful. The second part to that is just in terms of probably a rate study. And so I don't think we've done a proper rate study for quite a while. And so I would say we are due for that. When we do a rate study, it would take into consideration essentially those elements of remaining useful life and what capital needs we would have. And then it would establish a rate to address that capital load and to address the operations and maintenance.
Okay, any other questions or comments on the variances that were given? Seeing none, I'm actually going to ask Councillor Cressman to chair for 7.1.2 because I have a motion to bring forward on it.
Okay, 7.1.2, Office of the CAO Membership and Training and Development. And I think there's a report attached and listing the memberships as I remember. And I think you have a motion that has been circulated, or you're just introducing it now, Mayor?
Just introducing it now, if I may.
Proceed.
Thank you very much, through you, Chair. Thank you very much to staff for bringing this forward. In reviewing it, as your member on the regional level, we pay already, give a significant amount of money to Smart Waterloo Region at the regional level. And although they do great initiatives, looking through their website, they don't recognize any of their municipal partners. And I do think that really they frankly should be run through our grant program opposed to just one-off, and we don't have the historical context as to what started that funding. So I would just move a motion that we do not fund Smart Waterloo Region for this year. We can redirect them to our grant program. And then I do have a second motion after that, but we can dispense with that one first.
Is there a second to that? Councillor Dunstall? Questions or comments? Do you have any comments, Mayor?
I think I made my comments. Thank you.
Any questions? If not, all those in favor of the motion? I see that carried unanimously. Now back to you, Mayor, for your second motion.
Thank you. My second one is actually more so, I guess, direction to staff, also noting Sustainable Waterloo Region. I know at the regional level we do pay, but I do value and I do understand that council in the past did initiate that funding. I wanted to, however, direct staff that for 2026, we request that Sustainable Waterloo Region actually applies for funding through our grant program, because I think we really should get off of one-off payments that aren't really tied to any direct rationale or programming that has gone through council. So again, I don't want to make changes for this year's funding, but ask that staff reach out to Smart Waterloo Region and work with them to be able to apply to our grant program starting in 2026.
Seconder? Yes, Councillor Dunstall. Questions? I might have one. So you're referring to the $1,000 for Sustainable Waterloo Region?
Yes.
For 2026, is that correct?
Yes, so it's not impacting this year's funding. I'm still fine with paying them this year because I don't want them to suddenly not have that funding. It's for next year. I want that they be directed to our grant program to apply like any of our other organizations.
Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That carries unanimously, and declare my job done.
Very well done. Thank you, Councillor Cressman. On to 7.1.3. This is the operating gap request for capital growth funding. I do believe CAO Clark did have a comment that he wanted to make on this item.
So through you, Madam Mayor, to Council, yes. If you didn't notice the highlighted word update, I basically provided feedback that of the $100,000 from the tax contribution, approximately 50% or $50,000 is required for NITHView, and the other would deal with statutory exemptions and other types of exemptions that may come up throughout the year through different permitting.
Thank you very much. So we do actually have a decision point on this one. Yes, Councillor Dunstall, you had a question?
Through you, Mayor, to CAO, you mentioned the $50,000. When we talked, you had said that the taxpayers would be paying 0.86%. Is that still valid? I didn't say correct.
The $100,000 as it stands is equal to 0.82%.
Okay, thank you.
So like I said, we do have a decision point before us because we deferred this pending additional information. So the motion that's recommended is that the operating gap request form for capital funding be removed from the 2025 operating budget, resulting in a reduction in operating budget of $100,000, which is a 0.82 tax rate impact. Just to get this on the floor, and if people have other thoughts, we will allow amendments, but if I can get this on the floor with a mover and seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Dunstall. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Martin. I'm guessing based off of the lack of appetite to be so quick on this, we have some comments or questions perhaps. Councillor Cressman.
Yes, as I viewed this, it's $100,000 escalator clause per year over the period of time. and that builds a nest egg over and above what is required for Nithview. And my first inclination was, given the financial state of the township, is this the time to build a nest egg for other exemptions? And so that was the thing that struck me as I looked at it and said, I have appetite, and I couldn't speak before, but I see the importance for Nithview, but I see the opportunity to address other situations on a case-by-case basis when they come up. So that would be my comment, and I would think of putting a motion in place that that would cover the requirements for Nithview, but have any future ones. So I guess the question prior to putting a motion on the floor, I'm looking for a response from Acting CAO Clark. I can understand best management practices to do this. I can also see extenuating circumstances where this might not be the appropriate approach for Wilmot at this time.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor, the other portion is intended for exemptions, a number of which are statutory, in that the DC Act requires us to fund any exemptions that are required within the Act. So the Act stipulates that for accessory units, so a secondary unit or a tertiary unit for that matter, is exempted from paying DCs. The township has to make DCs whole, so we have to pay the DCs for those. So that is part of the strategy too, is that we need a funding source for those exemptions, because if there is no funding source, I still am obligated to fund them. So I have to find it from somewhere else. So I take it from a capital reserve or from operations for those statutory ones. They're not typically been that high in our experience, but they can add up quickly. If you get a number of accessory units at $20,000 or $30,000 a unit, next thing you know, you can be paying $100,000 a year in exemptions. So that is part of the strategy as well, is to be prepared for when those exemptions start to. And for something, another one is affordable housing constructed by a nonprofit. Those are exempt, and we have to fund those exemptions statutorily. We don't have a decision point on those. It's obligated.
Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you. I ran the numbers on this, and at the 0.86, and I know now you're telling me it's 0.82, so it'd be a little bit less. $6,000, if your yearly taxes are $6,000, it would be a hit of $1.25 a month. That's what it comes out to. So if your taxes are $4,000, it would be 83 cents a month. So from that perspective, I think that this should go through.
Councillor Cressman.
Yes, this is more of follow-up to, through you, Mayor, to CEO Clark in terms of secondary and tertiary. I just wanted, is that when a second home is built on the same property and a third one is built on the same property, or have I got that in? I see Director Okrafka nodding or going to sleep, I'm not quite sure, but I think that's what he's referring to.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the councillor. Yes, it's not necessarily a separate building. It could be an accessory unit in the basement. It could be a granny suite in the back. But it's an additional residential unit on an existing one single property. Generally speaking, my experience has been in cities, so it's, you know, student housing built in the basement or a granny flat built in the back, but it's the same type of idea, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, I suppose the question to be asked then is, what are we looking at annually at present in terms of having to fund right now?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's an excellent question that I'm still trying to figure out. So I'm working with Howie and his team to try to identify that. It's not been something that we've done historically. In a finance perspective, very well. And I willingly admit that. It's something I inherited, so I'm still working through looking at what that is. I don't know if Howie has any information on accessory units or what our experience has been, but that might give us some indication.
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Wilkinson, I'd estimate probably looking forward 10 accessory apartments a year would be what should be collected and put aside. And obviously we have not-for-profit affordable housing proposal in New Hamburg that will trigger some statutory exemptions that do need to be funded. And so what this plan is trying to do is to actually fund the statutory exemptions as we're supposed to do.
Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen. So I had seconded this motion just to get it on the floor, but I actually think that the fund is important, and so unless I've misunderstood the motion, I would be voting against it because I think it is an important fund.
Just to clarify, yes, you are correct, because right now the motion is worded as remove this from the budget. So if you want to see this fund go forward, you would defeat the motion and then in turn it would be in the budget. Councillor Cressman?
So again, to clarify through you, Mayor, to Director Akrafka, this would refer to complete homes that are built as a secondary unit as well. Working in one of the rental operations I have, I look in two directions and see a second home in two directions. So and they're what I would consider very, very nice homes, but that we would have to pay the DCs on those homes?
Through you, Mayor Salonen, to Councillor Cressman. So essentially, yes. The DC Act gives statutory exemptions to those units. However, the DC calculation, which calculates the infrastructure needs of the municipality divided by the anticipated growth, gives you a per unit cost. Those units still need to contribute. It's just that it comes through that statutory exemption that the homeowner doesn't pay. So it's kind of an incentive, if you will, to lower the costs of accessory dwelling units, ADUs, accessory residential units, second homes on properties, basement apartments. It's kind of a built-in incentive that the province requires us to do. And again, it would appear historically we have not been setting aside money planning for that in advance, and then you go to use your DCs, and your DCs don't have the funds there that you need, and so you end up having to, I think you coined a term, one previous budget, you're pulling money from other sources to fund things that you didn't plan ahead for.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, just a general comment. I mean, I really understand the purpose of this and that there, in theory, I would support, yes, there's a need for this and something that we should be funding longer term. However, I struggle to enact the policy without maybe looking at what the numbers are and what the requirements are. So in a way, I'm in favor of the motion as presented to remove it, but I would be looking at probably funding this come next year's budget when we have more accurate information to suggest what the actual need may be. I mean, again, it could be more, it could be less, I don't know. I get there's a sense of building a reserve here and working towards that. Ultimately, what I'm getting at is I'm not in favor until I get more information. At least that's my thought process at this time.
I just wanted to weigh in with a few of my thoughts. I think there's the portion which is about 50,000 of it for a project that council has approved, which is the NITH V1. So I think it makes sense certainly to start saving for that, knowing we need to pay for that somewhere. I guess the other component I'm looking at is kind of what risk we're willing to take on in lieu of that information for this year on future exemptions that are mandatory, as to if we want to take the risk of building up, taxing now and building up a reserve for that, or not, and potentially have to find other funding sources. I guess my question of clarification, Director Okrafka, and I'm kind of thinking about the New Hamburg example that you noted. At what point in a process are the DCs, like, do we need to cover the DCs that will be waived? Is it once the units are fully built and people move in, or is it before they put a shovel in the ground? I'm trying to kind of roughly figure out a timeline without having one.
Typically, the building permit issuance date would identify for you what the exemptions, what statutory exemptions would exist. However, then at occupancy, you kind of confirm that things haven't changed, either increasing the number of affordable units, for example, or decreasing. So there's a bit of flux there. It's not as simple as with the Nithview example, it triggers the payments on the date of occupancy. So there's a delay, but again, we're aware of what the amount would be at the building permit stage, because typically on that, which is a non-statutory exemption that council provided, the building permit triggers the calculation, but the payment starts with interest on occupancy, which typically we've just issued the permit. We're expecting about 2 years of construction on that. So that gives us a bit of lead time to build the funds there to cover that exemption that was provided.
Okay, sorry, I was talking about the other New Hamburg one that you were referencing. I see what you're saying, but would it be the same where it's mandatory?
The other project, for example, would have two components reasonably. There would be anticipated that there'd be some at-market rents and some less than market affordable units, which trigger the statutory exemption or not. But we don't know that split until we get the building permit, and we're not quite there yet. So there is that measure of trying to guesstimate what that amount could be without having the exact numbers until we actually see that building permit come in.
So completely recognizing it is an estimation, would it, based off of point of collection of DCs / we have to make up the DCs, be fair to say by 2026 we'd have more information on that particular site, not the Nithview, on the other one where we could make an informed decision for that funding envelope?
Sure. On that particular project, definitely you'd have more information. And I think the other key is that we're also anticipating updating our DC bylaw as a component of the new official plan that required under Bill 23 to update our official plan, including a component within that official plan update to do the capital components of, and here's what it costs to build the infrastructure necessary for this growth and plan for growth. So hopefully these will all fit together seamlessly, but there is that measure of 2025 will be a year of gathering information and fine-tuning future projections.
Okay.
Does that help?
That does help. Thank you. So with that, I would be curious on the appetite of council to perhaps look at changing, so that we don't remove and instead fund, I would say in the neighborhood of 55%, because we'd cover off the Nithview and then have a little bit of breathing room if there's a few one-off nanny flats that are built or something to start the strategy and approach, because we know it's coming down the pipeline, and also cover what council has approved, but not fully take the risk without getting additional information that's going to be coming forward. That would kind of be where my head's at, but I will leave that to council for discussion. Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I think we've learned our lesson on not building up our reserves. The numbers that I crunched here for a $6,000 tax bill is $1.25 per month. And if you're looking at 50% of that, that would mean 75 cents per month for someone who has a $6,000 a year tax bill to start building reserves. So I would suggest that we keep it as is so that we actually start building reserves so we don't get caught once again behind the 8 ball.
Any other questions or comments on the motion before us? Not seeing any. So I will call the vote then on this motion, and just remind that the motion is to remove this funding from the budget. So if you want to see this go forward, you would defeat it, or you would not vote in favor, just because it's a bit of a inverse motion to our normal ones. Wanted to clarify that. So seeing no other questions or comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And that is defeated. So moving along to 7.1.4, this is the cost of living adjustment. I will make note, Procedurally speaking, we did defer this to the very end of our discussions on operational, and there is still technically a motion of which we have not yet touched that may impact operational. I will go off of consensus if right now council wants to deal with this, or if we want to just vote, go back to the motions, go through all the motions, and then come back to this. I'm just trying to go with, we did defer this to the end of the operational discussions, and there is one motion that may impact operations. Is there Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, we did agree to discuss this at the very end. I mean, if there's appetite for it, I'm still in favor of that being deferred until the end.
Okay. Am I hearing any contrary to that?
No, when did we discuss moving it to the end? I don't remember that
This was at our last meeting. We deferred it, and the deferral time and place was at the very end of operational discussions.
Thank you.
I just was giving an opportunity for interpretation as we have zigzagged through this agenda tonight. But we will come back to this item after we complete all the capital items and then go back and complete the motions. So then we will proceed to item 7.2. Oh, apologies. Just give me one quick moment here. So item 7.2.1, which is the capital budget request forms. Does council have any additional comments or questions on that additional information? Okay, Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, are we suggesting that we'll go through each item listed below here?
We are going to go through 7.2.1.1 and then go through all of those items listed on the agenda. Are you asking for something beyond that? No?
Through the chair, sorry, what I heard was any questions on 7.2.1.
Right, I see. Sorry, I was asking more high-level questions. We are going to break down into 7.2.1.1.
Very good.
Okay, so no overarching questions. Very good. So item 7.2.1.1, which is the 2025 capital budget request form COR-2025-001, and that's the annual hardware, software, and network infrastructure upgrades. Staff have reported back with more information from our January 16th meeting. Are there any comments or questions on this one? Again, this item is received for information at this time, but if people want to make amendments, they're welcome to. And sorry.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to be clear on this one, I didn't provide any information back, and that's because I lost my IT supervisor a few weeks ago, and so what I had from him was in IT speak, and I haven't had a chance to connect with Raj to actually get the details. So I'm hoping to connect with Raj tomorrow, and then I will give council some further updates. I have some items, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me because I don't understand that. So once I have that, then I will provide it in plain English to council once I get that. So I should have that to you by the end of the week.
Councillor Wolf, okay. So the end of the week, we will be getting more information on that one. So with that having been said, thank you very much, Mr. Clark. We will go on to 7.2.1.2, which is the capital budget request for the New Hamburg Carnegie Library exterior restorations, which we did receive additional information on. Questions? Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, I don't really have any other questions. I mean, thinking about this one again and sort of coming back to it with sober second thought and looking at, again, where we're at, I think it's important that we fund it. It's an asset we own. It's also a very important building in a historical context. So I would move that we include this.
So it is already technically included, so I would just ask if anybody is opposed and wants to remove it, now would be the time to bring forward that motion. Okay, seeing none, we will move along. So to clarify, that item will be included into the capital programs. 7.2.1.3, which is the replacement service vehicle 701-14. Additional information was provided. Questions, comments? People want to remove this from the capital, leave it? Okay. Councillor Cressman?
I can't see us moving forward with this vehicle. I think the only option is either to purchase new or a good used vehicle that would fit our needs, and so I don't know. I just, given all that's wrong in the service history of this vehicle, if it walks like a lemon and it smells like a lemon, it likely is a lemon.
All right. Is anybody looking to remove this item then from the capital budget? No? Okay. Oh, Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I actually take an opposing point. I think we've invested in the vehicle, and while it may require, well, the justification is that it doesn't quite meet the current needs, I think it's still functional. Looking at the cost, I mean, it's unfortunate, but we have invested in repairs. I think if it continues to be serviceable to a certain extent, maybe not exactly what we like, then I would be in favor of removing this from the budget.
Okay, so that's been moved by Councillor Wilkinson. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by a question from Councillor Sadhu?
Yeah, so I'm looking at this. It says the estimated cost. So these fixes haven't been done yet. These are just a quote that we're having on it.
Through Mayor Sallin and Councillor Sadhu, that's correct. Just what you see on the first page there with some of the recommendations that are identified in the service report.
Is there a seconder then for removing this? Okay. I'm just seeing Councillor Sadhu. I know you were asking questions. Okay, I will give you a moment. I'll continue to review the report. So Councillor Sadhu, you want to second that motion? Okay. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, the only comment I make when I say we invested in it, there's a note here that in 2014 it did undergo, or 2024, excuse me, that it did undergo significant repairs, including transmission service, replacement of crack drive belt, front struts, so on and so forth. So I'm just looking at it and saying, given the investment we've already made in it, while there are some additional maintenance pieces needed, I don't know, it's still looking at a smaller investment than replacing an entire vehicle.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor? All those opposed? That is defeated. On to 7.2.1.4. This is the capital budget request form for the fire station. Sorry, Councillor Cressman.
Could I introduce a motion pertaining to this about investigating in the next 2 months if there's a appropriate used vehicle 2 years old or less, and if that can't be found, that they would move forward with a purchase? Is that something that's a little wonky, or does it make some sense?
I would defer to Director Catania if he has comments, since it's part of his fleet.
Through you, Mayor Sallin, and to Councillor Cressman, staff definitely can investigate that further. We generally would try to advise going used, or even if it's a year or two old, just because from a sort of a commercial industrial perspective, they do get beaten up, and then we're assuming those problems, specifically after warranty. But something as well. If this gets passed, we would definitely look at those options and potentially report back out to council.
I'll withdraw the suggestion, but
Okay. So 7.2.1.4, which is the capital budget request form for the fire station replacement and relocation of the New Hamburg Station 3, as well as the replacement pump for 621 at Station 2 and the replacement aerial for 639 at Station 3. Again, this does require direction. What is currently proposed, we have fill in the blanks as to how people want to proceed, but currently proposed is that council directs staff to either include, remove, or amend the capital budget request form. We will start with for fire station replacement and relocation, the New Hamburg Station number 3 in the 2025 capital. Does somebody want to, well, take it like an opening bid, start with include, remove, or amend for the fire station with the additional information provided? Councillor Dunstall?
Thank you, through Mayor. Chief Leeson, the need for the new fire hall is to accommodate the 100-foot truck, correct? Without the 100-foot ladder truck, there would be no need to move.
Through the chair, that's not entirely true. If you look at the fire master plan that was provided from 2020, it outlines several factors that are making that fire station a requirement to replace. It's 56 years old. It no longer meets and serves the needs of the current requirements. And one of the key factors is that it is in fact in a floodplain. We've had one close call since I've been in the community, and I've been told there's others. I haven't got a crystal ball, and I can't say if it's ever going to happen, and I'm not prepared to, push that forward. But I think council has, are you willing to accept the risk of losing the fire station to a zone 4 or worse flood, given the fact that we have weather change and we have all of these things going on, and with climate change, etc. There's quite a list of items that were identified in the fire master plan, if council had an opportunity to read it. The 100-foot aerial is also one of the key factors that would require the station to be moved to the Neville Street property as proposed.
Through you, Mayor, follow up. I was speaking with the builder of the new facility, and so I was asking him about the sprinkler system. I don't think that most communities have a 100-foot ladder, and I would assume perhaps that there are 6-story buildings. So my question is, and perhaps this is an engineering question, I did ask him and he said it would have to go to engineering, is what kind of precautions are taken when you're building a 6-foot building so that there would be enough sprinkler systems inside where you would not require that 100-foot ladder? Because to me that seemed to be why we were moving. So we had the 100-foot ladder, which was an expense, and then we had the move, which was an expense. So that's my concern, and at this time it just seems like such a high number to even look at this point. I don't think there's a question there. Perhaps it was just a statement. But certainly, Chief Leeson, if you'd like to respond to that, I'd like to hear your answer.
Through the chair, sprinklers in a 6-story building or a 50-story building are irrelevant through the fire underwriter's lens. What they look at is the risk to the community. So they go low, medium, and high risk. Wilmot falls fully within the low and medium high risk category, which requires an aerial. We almost fall into the high risk in some categories of building, being long-term care and schools. They're in the high risk category, so we have several schools in our community, and we also have the long-term care facility. So we're kind of in between. So Wilmot Fire has always followed the medium category. We haven't gone to the high category because we're not quite there yet, and it would be difficult to justify having 2 aerials in our community, which would push us into that. Plus, we would need more pumpers. To your first question about most municipalities don't have 100-foot aerials, almost all municipalities have 100-foot aerials. 100-foot ladders are very common. Wellesley has 100 feet. Woolwich has 100 feet. All the cities have 100-foot. Some have 75s as well.
Sorry, so we could make an arrangement with Wellesley, if we ever needed to, use their 100-foot ladder.
So through the chair, that is not possible.
Why?
The province says to us that we have to be able, so under the mutual aid program in the province, we have to look after our own needs first. It's item 1.1 right in the agreement through the mutual aid program that states that we shall meet our needs first, and then if we need additional help from our neighbors, if we had something horrible, the unthinkable happened, and we needed additional resources, then we can call our neighbors to help us. But we have to be able to look after our own needs first. That's a priority through the province that council has to balance that risk. I've said it before, council can say, you're not replacing that aerial, period. You're not buying a new aerial. Council can do that. My next question to you would be, first of all, I'd get legal advice on that decision, and also you're now going to be accepting risk that you're not accepting right now, that you're not having to accept right now. So I would caution council making those type of decisions without legal advice.
Councillor Cressman.
Through you, Mayor, to Director Okrafka. In terms of the building code for long-term care, is there additional precautions in terms of number of sprinklers, fire retardant material, etc.? I remember distinctly a long-term care facility in Quebec that was only on one level, but it didn't have any sprinklers, and there was catastrophic loss of life in that facility because of lack of sprinklers. And so I guess the question is, does the building code speak to additional precautions in a long-term care home that would give extra protection?
Through you, Mayor Sullivan and Councillor Cressman, I don't have a specific answer for you on those details, but I can get that from the Chief Building Official for you. That permit has been issued, and he can provide you with a very specific response to that question. I think would be the best place.
Chief Leeson.
Through the chair, I accept that would be the best course of action. However, I can also explain to you that fire underwriters does not, although they identify that sprinklers are on the building, if you have a fire, sprinklers don't always put the fire out, and smoke migration throughout the building is an issue. Now, when the building is designed, I do know for a fact that they put all kinds of measures in the building to try and protect from smoke traveling from floor to floor and heat and so on and so forth. There's fire separations put in that are smoke tight, etc. But that doesn't guarantee that you don't have stairwells or doors compromised, etc. So smoke could migrate up, which then forces people to go up naturally. And then when they start to head up, now you need an aerial to get up there to get those people out of there if the unthinkable ever occurred. So I'll defer to Director Okrafka to get that additional factual information that you can speak to, but I can assure you that that is covered under these discussions.
Councillor Cressman. Sorry, Wilkinson.
Couldn't have been confused with a better person.
Through the chair, I hope I can keep my hairs longer, but it's disappearing. Through the chair to Chief Leeson, I mean, you made mention in the fire master plan of an aerial device and obviously a requirement. I'm just sort of looking at it. The section, I do remember reading this briefly, but I just found the section, it doesn't make necessarily any recommendations for having a 100-foot ladder versus a 75-foot ladder. So I understand that you're suggesting that and recommending that, but the master plan that was just done says that, you know, a community the size of Wilmot should have one aerial device, and we're meeting that need, correct?
Through the chair, the current 75-foot aerial meets the existing needs of the community as far as its length. And I don't want to do a deep dive in how you arrive at determining what length of ladder you need, but I have to go through some quick math. You have a hypotenuse and a triangle, and we have to set the aerial at a particular angle that's a safe climbing angle for firefighters, which is 75 degrees. So the further we get away from the building, the less vertical height we have, and an aerial is measured from a plumb bob from the top of the ladder to the ground. It does not include the height of the truck. So, or sorry, it includes the height of the truck. My apologies. It includes the height of the truck, so they drop it to the ground. So your ladder's not really truly 100 feet. It's 100 feet less the height of the truck. But you have to remember too that we can't. If we could park the truck right up against the vehicle or the building, I should say, and raise the ladder vertically, yes, it's 100 feet. As soon as we move away at 75 degrees, then that 60 or 70 foot height building now becomes unreachable. And I can actually give an example in New Dundee because of the hills in that one area. We had a structure fire there and we barely reached the side of the house with a 75-foot aerial. We could have used 100 that day just because of the angle and pitch of the hill that we're on. So that's just one example that I've experienced since I've been here where we struggled to meet the distance we had to travel with the ladder. I hope that helps.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Wilkinson for a follow-up.
You go ahead. I think I know what you're about to say.
Okay. I'm just going to say, looking at the time, and IT needs about 10 to 15 minutes to change over to our meeting that starts at 7. Judging based off the conversation, I think that there's an appetite to further understand and consider. I think all of these fire elements fall into place. I would maybe suggest, also based off of the prior conversation, I am predicting an outcome that there's going to be some further movement on capital in terms of coming back to council and not being decided tonight. I would suggest perhaps we look at getting staff to bring in legal for us at our next meeting where we can ask the legal questions that the chief is suggesting we ask, and perhaps defer this decision until a point where we get legal counsel to answer and clarify the risk element potentially proposed to make better decisions and ask those additional questions at that point. If there are still extending questions at this time, that's fine, but that would kind of be where I suggest we look at moving on this topic, and then I would be suggesting we take a recess so that IT can switch everything over and we can start our meeting at 7, and then right after that meeting we'll be going back into this. So we're not leaving this tonight, we're still coming back, but Councillor Sadhu.
I just have one quick question for Chief Leeson. So these trucks that are, if we were to buy a brand new one, they're built in the U.S.?
Through the chair, a vast majority are built in the U.S. Yes, that's where all the manufacturers are located.
Okay. And
there are some Canadian manufacturers as well. I don't want to say there aren't.
Right, okay. So if let's say we were to explore a used option that's 10 years old, we can theoretically buy something from the States, pay the difference in currency, and bring that up to Wilmot and certify it in Wilmot? We can.
Through the chair, yeah, that's correct. You could. There's an example that I gave you in the documentation that there was one on Brindley Mountain that we could buy for $1.4 million US. However, by the time you paid the exchange and winterized it and put the metric system in it, et cetera, all the other requirements, we would have been sitting at about 2.2 million Canadian for that used truck with no warranty. That was an example, and that was just only available that day. Sorry, I don't want to go on too much, but buying a used vehicle is difficult for us right now because we're restricted to a 75-foot aerial. If council were to say to me, I'm going to give you X amount of dollars you can go buy that aerial, but here's your upset limit. You can't spend any more than that. And I found the appropriate vehicle, I could do that and put the 75-foot aerial in the existing station. The question is council going to Anyway, we have to talk more about what the future looks like, and all of these things play into that.
Okay. So is there interest then in directing staff to bring legal counsel to our next budget discussions, Councillor Cressman?
The only thing I would like in terms of this fire piece is leave the station aside and the ladder truck aside, but what are the agreed upon facts, if I use courtroom talk or verbiage? I think there's been 2 vehicles approved last year that have yet to be tendered, and then I think the proposal is for a rescue and a pumper in this. So I don't know if there's, if there is a possibility of having discussion on that yet this evening, separate from the firehouse and later, but not now. So.
Yes, so you're asking for the replacement pump proposal, that we further discuss that this evening. Okay, I think that's reasonable. And then the aerial along with the fire station replacement, we push off seeking.
What is the intention there or the plan?
Correct. So we can certainly get further into discussion of that this evening when we come back to this meeting. But I do think tentatively it's looking at one of our February meetings, not next week. So it will be the 24th, I believe, and doing like what we did tonight, adding time in beforehand. But again, we can further discuss if that doesn't work for people, both on the staff side and on the council side. And so now I would be looking for a recess, which would be that council now recesses at 6:48 p.m. to reconvene immediately after the conclusion of the regular council meeting. Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. All those in favour? That carries unanimously. And we will reconvene at 7 p.m. this evening for our regular council meeting.